Asante sana, that beautiful music from Tabi and the Gospel Ministers Band, bringing us to the start of the main program. Ladies and gentlemen, again, welcome to day 3 and the final day of this 9th Devolution Conference here in the beautiful county of Homa Bay. My name is Michelle Ngele Odhiambo, and I have the pleasure of guiding you through today's program. We're honored this morning to be joined by distinguished leaders from the national government, the Senate, National Assembly, the county governments, development partners, and civil society as well. We welcome you all and acknowledge all dignitaries present here today, and thank you all for your continued commitment to moving devolution forward. Today's theme is financing equity and inclusion. It is a topic that sits right at the heart of making devolution work for all Kenyans. We'll be asking how national government and county governments can ensure that every citizen, regardless of where and who they are, has access to equitable resource allocation, even and especially the most marginalized. But before we get into today's program, a quick recap of what happened yesterday. The theme yesterday was human rights and social justice, looking at how county governments can lead at the forefront as protectors of human rights and social justice. We had a powerful 7-member panel discussion there, reminding us that the Bill of Rights in the Constitution is not just ink on paper, but really a living promise for every Kenyan in this country. The mid-morning side events also brought critical calls to action. Among them was finalizing affirmative action regulations to move devolution forward, integrating human resource systems, and even conversations as basic as enforcing return-to-school policies for adolescent mothers in the country. The day's highlight yesterday was, of course, that address by our chief guest, retired Honorable former Prime Minister Raila Odinga, who underscored efficient resource allocation as key to moving devolution forward, to ensuring equity, inclusion, and social justice in our country. And of course, much later, we all ended with a wonderful Homa Bay welcome, a dinner hosted by the Governor, Gladys Wanga, that I suspect that some of us might not forget. But let's now dive into our main session, ladies and gentlemen, and that is sealing the fault lines and the strategies for action in financial inclusivity. We're asking, how do we make sure that no Kenyan is locked out of opportunity? And to set the stage for this conversation, it is my pleasure to welcome our keynote speaker, who is a visionary in the field of economic transformation. His name is Dr. Abraham Rugo, the Executive Director of Budgeti Hub, a man who's dedicated his entire career to ensuring that budgets are not just numbers, but tools for inclusion, inclusivity, and equality. Mr. Rugo has over 20 years in experience in decentralization, participatory governance, and public finance management in Kenya. He has previously worked at the Institute of Economic Affairs and as a public policy and devolution consultant between 2014 and 2017. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me in welcoming to the stage our keynote speaker, Dr. Abraham Rugo. A round of applause, please. Karibu sana.
Thank you so much, Michelle, for that warm introduction. And thank you so much to everybody. Distinguished guests, delegates, ladies and gentlemen, it is a great pleasure for me to be able to address us today at this. We are dealing with height issues here. These podiums should be short people compliant. So it's my joy to be able to address us today on this 20th year of my career in the devolution space. And it's a joy to also be addressing it in Homa Bay County, where I share a lot of history with the governor of this place. We served with her in the early days at Kenyatta University as student leaders. We've come a long way from the early debates at Bomas and full establishment of our devolved system. And this plenary today is especially special because it's focusing on inclusion and equity by channeling resources for services and enterprise through decentralized financing. Now, Kenya's 2010 Constitution, which we love and cherish, places equity and inclusion at its core. As a matter of fact, it mentions the word equity 5 times, equitable 11 times, and equal over 16 times. This was no accident. The Constitution was designed to deal with historical marginalization in Kenya, to ensure that all persons, regardless of the regions, benefit from public resources and that all had a fair shot at prospering in their country and the country they so much love. When we designed our devolved system, we were united on one thing. It offered the best opportunity to unlock development across the entire country by devolving fiscal, political, and administrative power closer to the people, giving them voice and choice, and in turn, spurring the production and consumption of goods and services. But now, as I think of the 20 years I have worked in this space and the Constitution turning 15, I'm forced to consider and ask all of us to ask, has devolution worked? How is devolution today? If Kenya's devolved system were a person, and I borrow this from Gladys Wanga, who spoke on the opening day, it will now be entering its teenage years. All of us experienced teenagehood in different ways. But one thing was sure, we had changes in our bodies, our thinking, and our mental outlook. Central to that stage was the search for identity, asking the question, who am I? And the desire for full independence to do things our own way. Of course, many of us were limited by resources and exposure of our social guides, including parents and guardians and older ones, and the villages that we came from. Could it be comparing devolution as this teenage is actually ready to fully fly, but we are held back by limitations, some of our own making, and others rooted in structures we have not fully honored or implemented? And therefore, this morning, as we ask about how does this adolescent find full identity of independence and growth, allow me to focus on 5 fault lines that I think are important for us to focus on as we move forward. The first one is constitutionalism and not just having a constitution. This calls for a mindset shift, and I have heard the word mindset shift used a lot in this conference. Constitutionalism is about the values central to which respect for humanity, and especially the rule of law, plays a critical role. Devolution is not about counties. Devolution is about distribution of power to deliver proximate services to all in public and to enhance equitable development. It is not about county governments that operate at the mercy of a benevolent big brother or big sister. On the other hand, it's about county governments that serve and are led by the inclusive public service that reflects the face of the county. In my observations over the last 15 years, I noticed a lethargy among national level players to see themselves as side A of this devolution coin. In other words, devolution is the same coin, county governments on one side, national government on the other side. On the other hand, one notices a systemic marginalization of ethnic minorities by a majority communities, ethnic and even clans in some counties. And I propose it's time for us to establish a full inter-county conversations, equity conversations that ensure that there is representation, there is equitable distribution of resources within counties and not just across counties. The second fault line is the fault line of functions versus finances. Our Constitution provides that functions should be followed by finances. Subsidiarity is a key principle here, where each level is supposed to perform the functions that are best due to it. And complete of transfer of functions and the attendant resources is imperative. But why this? Functions without sufficient finances sets up expectations, but none can be effectively fulfilled. Here we have a case that while the national government budget, for instance, has grown 250 times, to be precise, 248% since 2013, counties' allocation has only increased by 110%. Are counties doing only half or a quarter, almost a third of that? Yet counties are responsible for heavy sectors such as health, and in the case of health, it's 48% versus 52%, yet 90% of the health facilities are under the responsibility of counties. In agriculture, it's 77% to the national government and 23% to county governments, yet counties are responsible for a large part of agriculture. Those are just examples. In fact, county allocation is now just about 10% of the total national budget. But of course, if you removed public debt, then it will come to about 14%. The question is, are counties responsible for only 10% of the functions? Following the gazettement of all functions by the Intergovernmental Technical Relations Committee, it is time to reestablish the cost of functions, appreciating adjusted population, cost of delivering services, and improved state of development. And on this, I want to make a proposal. Can this be done from the bottom up? Not to use the political framing of it, can counties, having delivered health services for the last 10, 12 years, now give us the actual cost from their perspective of delivering health services? Can counties, having managed trade services, give us the cost of actually delivering these trade services? And therefore, then we have a more realistic perspective and proportionality. The work, of course, of IGTRC will be critical. And the zero-based budgeting gives us this opportunity where we reimagine how we budget. The third fault line is the quality services and not just structures. All of us in this room and across the country will agree with me that we have established many structures. We have so many structures all claiming to be delivering public services. Achieving equity and inclusion means that the established structures work to deliver services to all, especially the very needy, whose only option is public services, and I'll speak about that shortly later. Coordination based on harmonized structure is central for this. In a tight fiscal space, efficiency is very critical and requires constant review of how to do more with less, or at a minimum, manage what can be done unfaced over time. But it is also time to rethink the structures of government. Do we need structures of both levels of government all the way to the grassroots? Do we need a ward admin, a chief, a sub-chief, a ward assembly official, a CDF office, and the other funds and their officials across board? Or can these actually be harmonized as was envisioned in the Constitution? Can we strengthen the County Integrated Development Plan in the real sense and spirit of the Constitution, where it is actually an integrated development plan, where every agency, every actor, every player who is doing something in Homa Bay is guided by the Homa Bay County Integrated Development Plan, so that then we avoid duplication and abuse of resources in the sense of wastage of resources, in the sense of not coordinating, be it in health, in infrastructure, and even security. In fact, at this point, I'll point out that I think the success of devolution is going to be based on the intergovernmental relations framework that we established at the different sectors. Think about healthcare and the issues that we are dealing with. Can you imagine a situation where we have better coordination around UHC? My colleague keeps reminding me, UHC will succeed the day governors and county officials are the ones shouting loudest about its success, and not just by the national government. Number 4, before I go to my 5th point, is accountability and not just transparency. Our research at Budgeti Hub, and I'm joined by my colleagues here, and by the International Budget Partnership, over the last 10 years, has shown, and I would invite us to 356 booths to just see some of the numbers for your counties, has shown that both national and county governments have become increasingly transparent. In fact, as for the 2024 survey, 64% of information that is needed from county governments and 55% of the national government is available. At the touch of a button here, you actually can go to the Treasury website and download the budget for Homa Bay County or for the other county. But how does this relate to the state of accountability? Does it mean that counties are also 64% accountable for every coin and every shilling that they receive? The same county budget transparency shows, however, that only 12 out of 100, 12 percentage points is reporting on public participation. In other words, there is less engagement with the citizens as opposed to the transparency around it. While more coins are counted, we believe that more needs to count. The resources needs to count. Is Kenyans' lived reality reflective of meaningful transparency? Because transparency is not an end in itself. It is a means to accountability. Reports by the OAG, the Auditor General's Office, indicate a gripping picture. While not a generality, as has been demonstrated in this conference, the cry for accountability is loud and painful. It's patients receiving delayed or not treatment. It's the children who are not in school. And for your information, 1.3 million children are not in school, largely because they cannot afford. It's businesses that cannot make ends meet due to difficult space of doing business, and that will be my next point. It's citizens getting apathetic for no action to their input. And therefore, the gains of being accountable need to be the forefront of our transparency. There is no other option but being accountable. And number 5, and my last point, and this is focusing on incomes, we need incomes and not just opportunities. I think the current conversation is that there are so many opportunities that are being created. Kenyans are hardworking. They have work, but the incomes are not keeping in tandem with the cost of living. Look at this. 80% of the 20 million Kenyans who have something are in the informal sector or in the informal space. Inclusion policies therefore need to balance formalization and supporting those stuck in informality. This, of course, will not change overnight. Most Kenyans are accessing money from private sector, mobile money, chamas, and not government, not the Hustler Fund, not NHIF, not NSSF. 45.6% of the 18 to 25 years rural youth are excluded from financial access. But what is the state of unemployment? The reality is that 4 out of every 10 Kenyans is poor. 40% of Kenyans are poor, according to the KNBS reports. But the most shocking number is that 7 out of 10 Kenyans aged between 15 to 35 years are unemployed. In other words, you have 17 million who are in this informal space, but they cannot make ends meet. I'm convinced that the focus of government moving forward in addressing this fault line should be to ensure that people in business are able to make a living in the easiest and least harmful way possible. Counties need to understand that their role is not necessarily to provide credit to businesses, because private sector can do this, but to reduce the barriers to being a financially viable business. And on this, they need to address 2 big challenges: the cost of doing business and corruption, and I'll come to that in a minute. Government, I believe, is to be a facilitator of enterprises and not the enterprise itself. The government has to make a critical decision on its philosophy to development on whether the government wants to be in business or support businesses. And the argument for this is very clear, that public sector is not the most efficient mechanism of employment creation, and not even sustainable as it were. The reforms on SAGAs, for instance, provide us an important opportunity on this subject to be able to divest from enterprise and let businesses thrive. Public debt, especially domestic borrowing, needs also to be cognizant of this, because government cannot compete with the private sector, which we also expect of them to be able to provide employment. And therefore, it will not only save the government vital and now new, even more limited resources, but it will reduce scenarios where the government competes with industry. Specifically, to lower the cost of doing businesses, I would like to make a couple of proposals. One, is it time to consolidate for impact? Think about all the individual initiatives that different counties are making. Is it time to consolidate around the economic blocks, for instance? Think about enabling environment that will be able to make business possible, be it in infrastructure development, be it in manufacturing. But a critical thing that is often left out is that a key part of enhancing the business environment is giving citizens disposable income. How do you do that? You do that by ensuring that public services that business and their employees depend on are accessible. Whether you're thinking about registration, whether you're thinking about water, accessibility through roads, electricity, and healthcare. Because that reduces the private consumption for these services, because it doesn't make sense to pay taxes and still provide for these services privately, and lowering the cost of doing it business. Is it time to make it easier to pay taxes and offer tax incentives? Tax incentives can be used as alternatives to enterprise loans, particularly for interest groups like persons with disability and women. And finally, counties cannot talk about financial inclusion without talking about corruption. We cannot give with one hand and take with the other. We cannot claim and have the rhetoric around dealing with corruption and not addressing it. And therefore, the rule of law, and I go back to constitutionalism, needs. In closing, I think we have a great opportunity to make sure this adolescent devolution baby, or young boy, young girl, actually has a future. And in so doing, I call on all of us to be able to roll our sleeves, get to work, work in collaboration, work in coordination to make sure that we succeed. I thank you very much.